Here is a graph representing the best punter every single regular season week since 2020. And more specifically, I went through every single regular season game since 2020 to find the highest punting average that week. And if you don't know what a punting average is, it is basically the average amount of yards each punt goes from one punter in a game. And this is a pretty good representation on how punters have gotten better throughout the last 5 years. So let's dive into it a little bit. And in 2020, the only times that a punter averaged 60 or more yards in a game only happened 5 times, all of them within the first 7 weeks, with 4 of them being from 60 to 60.8 yards per punt, and the only one more being a 64-yard average by Corey Bojorquez on the Bills. And this would by far be the most yards per punt until midway through 2022. And in fact, the only time that it happened in 2021 was 2 times in Week 12 and Week 16 with a 61 and 60.5 average. And then we get into 2022, which was one of the most insane punting years in a long time, with once again a 61 and a 60.3 average, and this time only in the first 3 weeks, before we get 59.5s back to back in week 5 and 6, before finally breaking back into the 60s with a 60.3, and then Bryan Anger broke the all-time punt average yards per punt in one game with 2 or more punts. And yes, I am only doing 2 or more punts because 1 punt can go pretty far. In fact, that would make Randall Cunningham, our quarterback on the Eagles in 1989, have the punting record with a 90.1 yard punt, but it was just 1 punt. And in fact, in these last 5 years, twice it went over 71 yards, but it was from Bradley Pinion and Pat O'Donnell, who both had 73 and 81 yards, but just on 1 punt. But Bryan Anger somehow in a blowout, where the Cowboys were up 49-29 on the Bears, he had an 83 to bring his total up to the record. And this is already impressive enough because this is in a blowout, and it's really not unlikely for in blowouts the winning team to just not punt, which makes sense because they're winning by a lot, and even then they're not usually going to be backed up enough to get long enough punts. So this was a real lightning in the bottle moment. And then just 4 weeks later, it happened again, as Logan Cook on 3 punts averaged 68.7 yards, which is by far the most for 3 or more punts in a game. But Tommy Townsend was right behind him, as 2 weeks later, on again 3 punts, he averaged 66.3 yards to cap off an insane record-breaking 2022 punting season. And even though we got 2 records broken in 1 year of punting, these became anomalies. They were not the standard. And although in 2022, the amount of times a punter averaged over 60 yards grew to 7 compared to 2 in 2021, these 3 punts that all happened within a 7-week span of each other, they became the only games this decade so far to average over 65 yards a game, proving that all 3 were just anomalies, especially after these 2 massive dips. As just 4 weeks after the Tommy Townsend game, the highest average was 52.6, which would end up being the 3rd lowest for a week in the 2020s. So now into 2023, punters took a massive step backwards. And obviously this does not mean that punters got worse, because punting yards is heavily based off of chance, where these teams are placed, if the good punters are placed on bad teams so that they can get more yards on average to punt. But either way, punters still did not have a great year, as only in 4 weeks punters averaged over 60 yards a game, with the 2 best coming in back-to-back weeks, with AJ Cole and Bryce Baringer in Germany averaging 63.6 and 62.5 respectively. But now into this last season, punting got back up to that next level. Of course, it was without any insane games over 65, but multiple punters came very close, notably with AJ Cole averaging 64 in week 8, and Ryan Rico in his first NFL game setting the Bengals' all-time punting average record with 64.5. As well as Corey Bojorquez coming back into the game with a 63.2 average on the Browns this time. 6 times the best punter averaged over 60 yards a punt. And then we get to the current preseason. Now you may be wondering, what the hell, I did not hear about this. And I would have been thinking the exact same thing if I was watching this video and did not make it, because the only reason I knew that this happened was because of Isaac Punts. So shout out to him. I probably would have seen it, but I wouldn't have known how insane this was. Because just a couple hours before Ethan Evans' 70-yard field goal, which really broke the NFL for a day or two, Ethan Evans had a 72.5-yard average on 2 punts, and one of them that would have extended that average to almost 80 yards if it did not get called back for a penalty. And honestly, I doubt that many people would have even realized anything happened in the punting world, even if nothing else happened in the NFL preseason that week. But yes, in the same day, the punting average and NFL field goal distance record were both broken on the same day and would have been real records if it was in the regular season. And now you may be thinking, what the hell happened? Well, inevitably, this was going to happen. Kickers are going to eventually make an 80-yard field goal, although most likely I don't think anybody has ever. There will be a person that will eventually do that, and there will be a punter that will punt a perfect game, even though we have zero clue what that even looks like. That will happen eventually. But why are we getting even closer so immediately? Well, if you're a hardcore NFL fan or really have played football at all, you should know that quarterbacks and offenses have different footballs than kickers and punters. This is because it is a very, very different thing to kick a football than to throw and to catch it. So they need to feel different, they need to be different, they are the same footballs technically. But the NFL, usually punters want to grind down their balls. There's a whole process to getting a ball ready, a K-ball ready for kicking. And previously in the NFL, they only allowed kickers and punters to actually prep the ball 3 hours before game time. And in that case, the balls usually would have just been handed off to a trainer or to somebody else to do the job so that the special teamers can actually get ready. But now they have 3 days to prep the ball before game time, meaning that these balls will fly farther off of the kickers and punters' feet, and they are now much, much better for kicking and punting. Now, also, it of course does not help that both of these records were broken by 2 of the biggest legs in the NFL, with Cam Little and of course Ethan Evans, who can literally squat 585 pounds. So now what does this mean for the rest of the NFL and the NFL's future? Well, number one, if you want a more detailed and probably more accurate version, go over to Isaac Punt's video that I already mentioned. He did a pretty good breakdown on it, and I recommend it. But I do think that this only accelerated the inevitable, and there will be kickers and punters that will be, averaging 80 punts a game at some point and making 75-yard field goals. It will happen eventually. This just made it quicker, and I do think that potentially, and I mean, of course, special teams already is a third of the game. It's just as important as offense. And teams have lost seasons and lost games because of bad special teams. But I don't know, it's very murky, especially with this new rule change that makes it insanely possible for, Brandon Aubrey to just go out and kick a 73-yarder. That's very possible now. So at the end of the day, I just thought this would be cool because literally nobody is talking about Ethan Evans and what he did, and I think it's very, very interesting. So I hope you enjoyed it, and if you were to get anything about this, pay a little bit more attention to special teams. They need it. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.